To be an enemy of the US is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. This famous quote from Henry Kissinger is now unfolding in real time, as Europe's biggest economy by far, its industrial powerhouse Germany, is now collapsing. And yet the Western media has hidden the true cause. Just last month, Germany's economic minister, Robert Habeck, said in a speech that the German economy is performing, quote, dramatically bad. Last year, Germany posted the worst performance across all major global economies, with its economy being the only one to actually shrink by 0.3%. Even worse, this bleak situation shows no signs of improving. There were high hopes that 2024 would turn things around and be a comeback year for Germany, and until recently, the German government projected a growth rate of 1.3%. However, shockingly, they've now been forced to slash this forecast to a mere 0.2%. The scariest part is that most economists and business leaders agree this isn't some temporary recession, but a deeper structural problem of the German economic model. If you think this is an exaggeration, understand that by now, an astonishing 2 in 3 German companies have left Germany or at least partially relocated abroad, with most citing the sky-high energy prices, inflation, overregulation, and endless political debates as their reasons for leaving. What or who is causing this catastrophic collapse of Germany's long-standing economic and industrial prowess? Germany's dire situation is being caused by 3 main reasons. Number 1, the country's sky-high energy prices. Number 2, its reduced exports to China. And number 3, its increases in military expenditure. What's most incredible about these 3 things is that they in fact all have one main culprit, and that is actually the United States. Let's start with Germany's reduced exports to China. Until recently, Germany was the world's export powerhouse, with its main exports of motor vehicles, machinery, and chemical products being the lifeblood of its economy. Crucially, China has been Germany's main trading partner every single year for the past 8 years, including being an essential and massive export market for German goods. Simply put, China's market is indispensable to Germany's economy. However, this vital relationship is currently under attack by the United States. Consider the companies Volkswagen and BASF, 2 of Germany's largest companies by annual revenue, and thus 2 key contributors to the German economy. Only last month, they were coerced by the US government into shutting down their factories in China, specifically in the western province of Xinjiang. It's here that for many years, the US government and military-industrial complex have pushed the narrative that China has enslaved the local Muslim Uyghur population and subjected them to ethnic cleansing and forced labor, despite overwhelming evidence that clearly shows this is not true. Let me show you how the US government's coercion works. First, BASF was threatened by the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. It's IPAC, an international group of Western politicians founded by anti-China hawks such as Senator Marco Rubio, and whose purpose is essentially to pressure governments into containing China. Note that IPAC is funded by the NED, a CIA front which finances regime change operations in countries deemed to be hostile to the United States. It's also funded by George Soros' Open Society, whose stated purpose is to help counter the threat China's growing influence poses to the rules-based order. The threat BAS received read, "The credibility and integrity of your company are at stake, and we believe it is crucial for you to take swift and decisive action in addressing this matter." I don't think I need to elaborate on what happens when a country or company doesn't comply with the US government or the CIA's wishes. Unsurprisingly, IPAC bases its ultimatum to BASF to pull out of Xinjiang on a new report from the infamous Adrian Zenz, a well-known anti-China hawk and evangelic born-again Christian who has said, "I feel very clearly led by God against Beijing." His report asserts, without any evidence, that BASF appears to be implicated in gross abuses of the Uyghur to a shocking degree. Working for the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, an anti-communist propaganda shop founded by the US Congress, Zenz has consistently produced highly questionable research on Xinjiang that has not withstood basic scrutiny. But unsurprisingly, this hasn't prevented Western media and governments from frequently citing it as established fact. BASF has always conducted regular due diligence measures ever since opening factories in Xinjiang, including internal and external audits, and has not once found any evidence of any human rights violations. Of course, IPAC didn't care and maintained maximum pressure on BASF until they caved and pulled the plug on their operations. What's crazy is that the US is currently executing this exact same playbook with Germany's largest company, Volkswagen. In a coordinated attack, shortly after the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and Adrian Zenz produced their allegations against BASF, IPAC followed up by threatening and coercing them into closing shop. And now, the victims of Communism Memorial Foundation have just brought literally exactly the same allegations against Volkswagen. It doesn't take a genius to figure out on what's really happening. This isn't the first time that Volkswagen has been baselessly accused of employing or being complicit in slave labor in Xinjiang. Over the years, Volkswagen never caved to the pressure, and like BASF, conducted numerous audits that once again never found any forced labor. However, this time it's looking like the German automaker will no longer be able to withstand the pressure and be forced to shut down its operations as well. Even crazier, other German automakers have been targeted as well, as the US recently impounded thousands of Porsche, Audi, and Bentley cars merely because they were suspected of containing parts from Western China. Shockingly, these examples are far from isolated incidents. Since deciding that China needs to be contained and decoupled from, the United States has pressured everyone, from companies to countries, to fall in line and do the same, even if it will destroy their economy. If you refuse or show reluctance, the US government employs threats, coercion, and even sanctions. For example, in 2022, the US government banned the sale of advanced microchips to China in an effort to cripple China's growing microchip industry. It then coerced chip makers across the world to comply, one of the most notable examples being Dutch semiconductor company ASML. This has hurt chip makers significantly, including American ones such as Nvidia, as China has typically been their biggest customer and represents a huge portion of their revenue. It also must be pointed out that for companies coerced into pulling out of Xinjiang, including Volkswagen and BASF, this has led to major job losses in the region, and thus, ironically, it actually hurts local workers the most, including Uyghurs, because they now have lost their livelihoods. As much as the US is to blame here, astonishingly, almost all of Germany's political elite, mainstream media, and general population have eagerly obeyed America's wishes to demonize and decouple from China. This is absolutely bizarre and frankly foolish, because numerous experts and German business leaders have repeatedly warned that decoupling would destroy the German economy. The sad truth is that much of Germany, especially its political and media establishment, have a long history of blindly taking US foreign policy narratives at face value, even when they themselves are the ones getting screwed. The best recent example of this is the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline, whose sole purpose was to transport natural gas from Russia to Germany and the rest of Western Europe. While the culprit has yet to be ascertained, it's highly likely that it was the United States for a number of reasons. First, US President Joe Biden literally said they would. Right before Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Biden asserted, "If Russia invades, there will be no more Nord Stream. We will put an end to the project. I promise we will be able to do it." Second, the severing of Germany's energy dependence on Russia has been a long-standing, openly stated American objective. Third, last year, famous and award-winning investigative journalist Seymour Hersh published a bombshell report in which he meticulously describes how the bombing was planned, prepared, and executed by none other than the United States. You'd think this would have dominated German news, but shockingly, in the aftermath of the bombing, this received virtually zero airtime. Instead, German media uncritically repeated US government denials and focused on destroying Hersh's reputation. Sadly, most Germans naively believe that Western countries are just not capable of such egregious acts, much less war crimes, simply because they are democratic and have Western values. In short, Western nations are the good guys and would never do such a thing. And that leads us to the second point, sky-high energy prices. Germany's skyrocketing energy prices have also played a tremendous role in the country's dramatic decline. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Germany and the EU introduced sanctions against Russia, while Russia responded by sharply decreasing its delivery of natural gas to Europe. This skyrocketed Germany's energy prices and severely damaged its economy. This is because before the invasion, Germany imported a whopping 55% of their gas from Russia. And it's precisely this cheap Russian gas that has been so important in enabling Germany to become an economic and industrial powerhouse. Of course, sanctioning your main energy supplier was never the smartest choice to begin with. The fallout cannot be understated. In the same year the war started, the market price for natural gas has increased more than tenfold. While households and smaller businesses were somewhat protected from this massive spike through policy measures such as the infamous gas price break, household gas prices still tripled at the worst point of the energy crisis in 2022. And even though gas prices have since come down, they're still around double of what they were before the war. And shockingly, it's estimated that this will remain the new normal for the foreseeable future. Incredibly, Germany's price of electricity, much of which is produced in gas power plants, has fared even worse. In fact, the price has been spiking ever since the war broke out, and this trend hasn't slowed, let alone reversed. By now, Germans pay some of the highest electricity prices worldwide. Altogether, this has caused countless German citizens to struggle to make ends meet and even stay warm enough in the winter. But it's not just ordinary Germans who suffered. Remember, an astonishing 2 in 3 German businesses have left the country to some extent. It's worst in the country's mechanical engineering, industrial goods, and automotive sectors, where an astonishing 70% of companies have relocated abroad to a moderate or very large extent. It's not hard to see why Germany's economic and industrial power has collapsed so rapidly. What's more, since Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, when it suffers, the EU does as well, and the damage is rippling through the entire continent. Ludovic Viot, the Confederal Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, sums up the dire situation well. We are facing a very worrying situation. The lack of investment we are seeing today is already having dramatic implications for the working communities. Factories are closing, and jobs are being cut in the very sectors that lifted Europe to where it is today. Needless to say, Germany and the EU were forced to find alternative and, frankly, far more expensive sources. One of those sources was, in fact, the United States, who sold it to them at astronomical prices, leading Germany and other nations to complain and accuse the US of profiting off the war and make Europe dependent on its gas.